Tēnā koutou katoa, haere mai ki tēnei hui, ki te mana whenua rangitānei, he mihi nui, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Morena everyone, welcome to Planning and Strategy Committee for August. Just to start off with, we'll just run through our health and safety. So we're obviously recording our meeting and streaming online at the moment. I believe we are still, for the online participants, still using the voting devices, so you'll just signal in the chat box how you're supporting the recommendations coming forward. In terms of if there is an emergency, I'll explain this for our visitor, acknowledge former Councillor Nixon in the room, but if there is an emergency, we'll head outside, follow our administration team out to Te Marae o Hine. And if we need a defibrillator, that is on the ground floor. If you need anything, please let us know. The councillors that we've got online at the moment, we've got Councillor Hancock and Councillor Hapara and Dingwall will be joining in a wee while. We'll just move on to apologies. So we've got apologies from Councillor Dingwall and Hapara for lateness, and apologies from Councillor Dennison and Councillor Meehan. We'll just add the Mayor in for lateness. I know he's just finishing up a meeting with Sport Manawatu as well, and we'll be here shortly. So I will move that the apologies be received, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Thank you. Is there any comment? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. I haven't received any notification of additional items, so we'll move on to declarations of interest. Great, so moving on to item 4, public comment. And we do have a public comment on the Pinako Park report from Annette Nixon. Morena Annette, you can just make a start when you're ready.
Morena, Madam Chair and councillors and people whose faces I remember. It did feel a bit like coming to work. I'm going to speak about item 6 and ask you to have a look at page 18 with the photograph of the Girl Guiding Hall at Pinako Place. I have a long association in the Awapuni area and remember Pinako Place going in and the houses being built. So when I was chair of the Awapuni Ward Committee, 03 to 06, we asked council for a list of the land holdings it had in Awapuni. Nothing happened, but when Peter Wheeler and Pat Kelly and I were on council the following year, we asked again, and it took about 3 years for that information to be compiled for the city. And it was quite interesting because there were all kinds of bits and pieces that had to be tidied up. But at that time, it was also, there was consultation to see if there was surplus land which the council could sell. And that included reserves, such as the Pinako Place Reserve. And that resulted in a great deal of public comment and some very interesting times in the chamber. and an overwhelming demand to hold reserve land. And that's what happened. Now, in Awapuni, I'm a member of the Pathways Presbyterian Church, and I'm on the property team there. So I have permission from the church and also from St Matthew's Church and from Kingston Street Community Church and from the Awapuni Community Centre to make comment and refer to them in this presentation. So the church is about to let the, perhaps I should just speak to this picture first. The guide hall's there in Pinako Place. At the back you will see that there's a storage building which the Scouts used. Now that is in terrible state. And as it happened, last week I had sent a photo of the spouting which has fallen off the back of that building. And as that is on the boundary of the Presbyterian property, which is the manse, the residential building there, which we don't require for a minister at the moment, and it's being used, it's being leased to a refugee family. So it creates a great deal of dampness in an already damp area. And it's become far more obvious because following the storm earlier this year, we've had to have trees removed in that from behind there. And behind the hall, over to the left, is a large area of grass and also the op shop that the church operates and the church property. So, and then further along the street, of course, we have St Matthew's Anglican Church, and the Kingston Street Community Church is just around the corner. So I'm also involved in a number of other groups in Awapuni. So the options for the future of this land, now the guides have said that they are in the process of selling off all the properties that they hold, is A, to return it to the Crown. Well, we need the green space, so I would say no to that one. And the second one is about survey future use opportunities, and yes, I think that would be a great thing. Now, from Monday next week, the Korimako Vineyard Church is taking a lease on the Presbyterian property 5 days a week. We already have the Kingdom Ambassadors Church using it on Sundays and at other times. So people who were using the St Mark's hall or church for meetings will no longer be able to do so, although there is some flexibility depending on what Korimako requires. So we're going to need more meeting space in the area. So that's part of the demand. Amy, the vicar at St Matthew's, says that there are certainly groups that approach St Matthew's Church and are not able to be accommodated. Terry Lauder, who's the booking officer for the Awapuni Community Centre and is stationed at Kingston Street Community Church, she says that for their own building and also for the community centre, they can't accommodate everybody who is looking for space. She said sometimes there are groups that want to meet weekly or and so require a more comprehensive booking. She also has a group in Takaro who rings, she says, every 6 months looking for storage and meeting space. So any survey needs to be wider than just Awapuni. People come from all over the city to use meeting space in Awapuni. One of the things we're finding at the Awapuni Community Centre is that we are getting a lot of casual bookings, for example, on Friday nights, Saturday nights. This last weekend we had a baby shower, a birthday party on the Friday night, a baby shower on the Saturday night. And what we're finding is that people no longer have the space in their houses to be able to host a larger gathering. And so the communities, our community centre anyway, is finding a lot more casual bookings.
Annette, your time's up, so I'll just
Right.
ask if you could make your closing remarks now so
Right,
that we
closing
can wrap up.
remarks are Korimako Vineyard Church has indicated that it's been trying to get hold of the guides to ask if they can use that building on a Sunday for their kids' ministry. So that's one part of the demand and an indication that's there. Please survey the community and see what kind of indication of use there is. I think it would be interesting on a number of levels. But include the churches, include the schools, include the service clubs and the library, and improve on the last lot of survey that went on in the Awapuni area. And also, could somebody please sort out the stormwater problem on the back of the Scout building, because both the op shop and the manse suffer from the stormwater run off there. As it happened, I had somebody from Networks call at my place about another stormwater matter. So we talked about that. There's been a few emails going to and fro, and they're expecting the guides to pay for the spouting repair, and I'm not sure that they have the wherewithal to be able to do that. But it is a problem that needs to be dealt with, and if the building's not being used, it's not in a good state, perhaps it can be demolished and we put in a community garden. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Annette. Councillors, are there any questions?
You could ask me a question about parking.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Annette, for coming in and making the comment. What is your thinking about the possible joining together of the church land and this land into a sort of a wider development? Is that an option?
Well, the third option is land banking, and by maintaining that property, you have that option for the future. You will remember that over the last 5 years, I've been part of deputations to the annual plans to talk about a community hub, come library, and, there's a wonderful development opportunity there with that adjoining land. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, it does.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, there is one more question that's just popped in. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies. I was having trouble getting the card to talk to the machine, to talk to the system. Thank you, Annette, for speaking to us. A question about parking.
Thank you very much. About 10 years ago, there was a complaint. No, it's more than that. It would have been about 2010. A complaint from some of the residents about the guide parents taking up, too much of the parking in Panako Place. And at the time, I had a meeting with some of the guide people, and we offered the parking area at St Mark's Church as an overflow area. Whether or not under the new lease with Korimako Vineyard Church, that's still an option, I don't know. We'd have to wait and see. But there are opportunities to manage these things.
Thank you. Madam Chair, could I get a question to officers just to clarify around maintenance standards around buildings?
Not right now, we're just taking the public comment at the moment.
Great. We'll hold that, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thank you, Annette. Just a question, you made a comment about the need for green space. Looking at page 17 of the report, it looks like there's about 3 houses between Panako Park and Awapuni Park. Mm-hmm. With it being that close to Awapuni Park, would you see that green space as serving the purpose of needing green space in that vicinity?
Where Awapuni Park is, it tends to serve a different group of residents. So Pinako Place has been used, it's been used for dance classes, it's been used for community dinners, it's been used for a number of different activities than happen over at the other one.
So I guess I've heard your comments about the need for the building, but
Yes.
My
But
question
also
is
for
really specifically around
The space.
the green space, given the location.
When I look at what's happening with the casual use of the community centre and the increase of people needing places to meet, I think they also need places to meet that offer them space.
Okay.
And there's no reason why there shouldn't be a community orchard, plantings, whatever. You know, things that engage with the people in the area. Certainly the other things that we're doing there, the little library, well used. St Matthew's are looking at a pātaka kai. And it's because whatever is put out there is being made use of.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Annette. There's no further questions. So I'll move that the committee resolves a public comment be received for information. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Johnson, thank you. Are there any comments? Great, I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Moving on to the confirmation of minutes, page 7. So I will move that the minutes of Planning and Strategy Committee meeting of 8th of June 2022, Part 1 public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. Seconded by Councillor Barrett, thank you. Are there any comments? Great, no comments. I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Moving down to item 6, our report on Pinako Park Strategic Options Review, and we've got Kathy Devertodd, Manager of Parks and Reserves, and Bryce Hosking, Manager of Property, to present this.
Thank you, councillors. We'll take the report as read. Just a couple of matters of clarification that have arisen during the public comment. The current arrangement on the land is it is a land-only lease, so all responsibility for maintenance of improvements on the land fall with the leaseholder, in this case Girl Guiding New Zealand. And the second matter that council would have to consider during any consultation on use for the site is the appropriate of the use, whether it's consistent not only with the district plan but also with the Reserves Act. As recreation reserve, there are some limitations on community groups that may be able to occupy and use that space on an ongoing basis. I don't know if Bryce had anything to add?
No, that covers my points well.
Thank you. Well, we do have some questions. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. Around the issue around maintenance, I'm aware that the maintenance is responsible for the leaseholders, but do we not in the contracts, like in this case where there's issues with stormwater, and do we not keep an eye on the asset management, or, you know, what's our process where there is problems? Do we notify people that they have to bring the buildings up to spec, or what do we do?
From a building perspective, they're required to meet regulatory standards, so they have to have a BWOF if it's required, etc. If any sort of more wider issues, such as maybe some stormwater on the site, are come apparent, Typically, as the landlord, we'd have a conversation with the tenant, but given the responsibility for that sits on them, usually it's a conversation with them around funding and making improvements. Probably the exception to that would be if it was causing a wider issue, so in an extreme situation where it was flooding all the surrounding properties or there was something like that, then maybe council in its capacity might be wading in to look at a greater issue there. But if it's isolated to the site, that would be solely with the tenant's responsibility.
So as a council, I know that around there's a couple of buildings which are in quite disrepair. So where do we step in, to sort of tidy up an area or to stop it degrading an area where a building's not up to spec?
We don't, unless it becomes a health and safety risk, okay. In which case it would be stickered by our regulatory part of council.
Okay, thank you.
Just further to that, we are limited by the clauses contained within the lease. So tenants as well as landlords have rights, and we have to make sure that we're not exceeding those rights. If another party came along and said, for example, in this case, that there was a neighbouring issue, we would have a conversation. But actually we are limited by the legal agreement we've entered into between us and the tenant.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's a question, but probably not to the officers who are here, but to officers in general. There was a piece of work being done on community facilities, needs assessment across the city, what the criteria would be for working with a community group to accept a new facility, etc. Can we know where that piece of work is at?
Are you able to answer that, Anne-Marie?
Oh, Anne-Marie, we'll just stop you there and get you in front of a microphone so that we capture this response.
Kia ora, Anne-Marie Murray, Policy Analyst in Strategic Planning Unit. I understand that report is in a reasonable state in terms of a good draft has been recently submitted to officers for review, so that's been looked at right now.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. The other question is around, and it might not be able to be answered, but how often we get requests from community groups for a kind of a home, if you know what I mean, not just to rent a space, but to have a space and to keep their kit in it. Because I do recall when we had a similar discussion about the Scout Hall on Amberley Avenue, I think it was, we had an MMA group come and submit to us that they wanted a space. Now, I don't know what their situation is now, but how often are we getting requests from groups to have a space?
So I'll ask Bryce to follow on. Yeah. Not all requests for space come to us. So, for example, Sport Manawatu deal with a lot of groups. And so there's a lot of agencies that we support and they may have a request for space. We have other groups that come towards us for space, and what we always try to do is to get them to partner with an organisation that has another building. And pair things together. And I'm aware that Sport Manawatu does that as well. So where we can, we get better utilisation of existing facilities. We haven't ever gone out, however, and said, who out there needs space and needs council's help with space, because that really hasn't been our mandate. So it's very difficult for us to assess without some sort of public process what demand would be. It's very difficult for us to count how many requests there's been because it comes into multiple agencies.
Yeah, as I was thinking that might be the case. So if we were to opt for investigating the level of community demand, then how would that be? How would officers propose to go about that, given the difficulty that you've just outlined in knowing what the demand is across the city?
I'm going to ask Aaron to come forward on that, to just indicate whether we've given any consideration to that or not.
Morning, councillors. Aaron Phillips, the Parks Activity Manager. Probably following on from the previous comments, using the agencies that have the networks in the community, so through Sport 102, through the community development team, and perhaps the library network. Probably also using social media and our comms team to ask who out there is looking for space. I haven't got a detailed plan, but I'm sure we'll get good response.
All right, thank you for that. Thanks, Madam Chair. Oh, sorry, no, I did just have one more question.
We actually just have an update on
on the
a
report?
question. Yes, wonderful staff listening online.
Yeah, I just had a text message from Julia McDonald, Strategy and Policy Manager. So she's homesick, but being a diligent council officer, she's watching from home. So she said that she anticipates the Community Facilities Review will be ready for the Community Development Committee in September.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Yes, sorry, just one more, Madam Chair. I'm aware that Council has I think it's a strategy, but it might just be a guideline of having no more than 500 metres to a green space. Is that still something that's considered when these sorts of issues come up?
Yeah, so a standard is that people should be within 500 metres of a green space. The level of service that council currently delivers is the percentage of people that are within 500 metres of a space, and the level of service that we currently deliver in our existing reserves is variable across the city, and so that level of 500 metres we normally use in our greenfield subdivisions. That criteria is really about how close a person is to a space. It doesn't indicate the quality of that space and what's available at that space, and that comes in terms of the types of reserves we develop. So yes, we do use that as an indicator of where there may be in an existing suburbs gaps in the provision. And certainly we have a map and we look at that. In this particular area of the city, there isn't the same gaps that we have in perhaps some of those older areas of the city. And that's just an indication, and it's the same in Kelvin Grove, that's just an indication of when those suburbs were developed. We took a lot of smaller reserves as well as larger reserves.
Okay, so that's still a current indicator then?
Yes, but as I've said, the indicator is the percentage of people within 500 metres as opposed to everybody's 500 metres. Yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you for clarifying that. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, team. I probably understand the answer to this question, but I still want to make it sure. Because in the report, the Girls Guide have also offered us to buy that structure. Is there any value in buying that structure?
The simple answer is we would have to look at that a bit more closely. The structure itself is in reasonable structural condition, and so it's not bordering on condemned or anything along those lines. But in terms of what it would be worth, what the building could be purchased for and things like that would have to be investigated further if that's what council wish to do.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess the other thing that goes with that is every asset you buy has an ongoing associated cost, and if the demand doesn't cover those costs, then that does create a new rates impact for the community.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, 4.4 talks about if we, the consultation process, if we went down the route of having a proposal to remove the reserve status, would that consultation process create the opportunity for community views on recreation and community use?
Can I just ask, I'm going to seek clarification on that question. Are you asking, would that provide the opportunity for community views on recreation and community use as opposed to housing, or just the type of recreation and community use?
So perhaps I'll explain where I'm coming from. So the paper gives us two options: to go to consult the community. Well, it gives us three options, but there's two in the recommendations. To consult the community on the demand for recreation community use, or the proposal to revoke the reserve status. And if we went down that route, I'm trying to understand what the scope would be for the consultation that we would have with the community.
Thank you for that clarification. So the Reserves Act is somewhat similar to the Local Government Act, in that the council needs to indicate its preferred option and consult on its preferred option. We can wrap in provisions of following the Reserves Act process and the Local Government Act at the same time. And really in that regard, it would be in relation to how we notify for the Reserves Act process and indicating what provision under the Reserves Act. But we would still, in either case, have to go to the community with the preferred option so that the community had something to give feedback on.
Okay, so given that, what do you think we should be considering to determine our view of the community? Sorry, that's probably... I guess what I'm trying to figure out is the order of things here. If we're to make a decision today about what we think the community's preference might be, what do we have to inform that view?
You have the report in front of you.
That's all. Okay. So just my second question relates to 5.2, the housing capacity assessment. In terms of the 5,000 additional houses that are needed over the next 10 years, and that 55% of those will need to be met through developing land in the existing urban area, how much land, how much of what's required to meet that 55% has already been identified? So am I clear?
I'll need to direct that question to the Chief Planning Officer.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because ultimately it depends on how willing or able the market is to pick up intensification. So as you know, we're working on a plan change to, I guess, reduce barriers or perceived barriers to intensification. So, but I guess the short answer to your question is there is significant capacity within the existing urban area to accommodate growth. But ultimately it's going to be a combination of how we enable or encourage that through the plan. So there's no reason why the existing urban area can't accommodate that level of growth. It's whether the planning and market, the planning provisions in the market encourage or enable that to occur. Okay,
so given your answer, so are you suggesting that we do have adequate land in the areas that have already been identified to fulfil that need for 55% if there is enough intensification?
Yes, on paper, but the challenge is that you know, the market isn't necessarily responding quickly in terms of moving to a different form of intensification to meet those demands over the sort of medium to long term. So I guess what you've seen with some of the other housing projects is they're, in terms of council repurposing land, is it's about trying to get more intensification more quickly. But as I said, there is capacity within the urban area without Pinako Park to accommodate growth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy and Bryce. There's no further questions. So we've got recommendations in front of us, 1A or B. Is there anybody that would like to, Councillor Johnson, would you like to move one of those?
Yeah, I'd like to move 1A, please.
And I'll invite you to speak to that now, Councillor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Councillors, I think the difficulty with this report is that we're trying to balance two contrasting priorities. So we're trying to balance community need with housing need. But in this particular case, I think we'd be very wise to go out to the community to find out whether there is demand for this particular space and this particular building before we make any decision about whether or not to advance down the housing route. And the reason I say this is that as the office has kind of expanded on in questions, we really don't know what the needs are. I'm aware of some groups that are looking for, I guess you could call it a permanent home for their particular community where they can keep their stuff and use the space regularly for their own meetings, both in the sporting and in the ethnic community side. But there may be others. And I think the thing is we're not really aware of what the needs are out there. So I would be very keen for us to investigate if there is demand before we make any decision about housing. The other thing is that the community facilities report, which I asked about, is coming quite soon. And that will give us a framework for making these sorts of decisions about deciding whether or not a facility is needed in a place, how we would partner with a community group if their facility was offered to us. And I think, again, I'd prefer that we didn't make any decision about repurposing a community space for housing until we've got that report back. And finally, there is adequate capacity to accommodate growth without using Pinocchio Place for housing. And although in the report it does present the choices as between community use and housing, I do note that it wouldn't be up to us to provide the housing. We would be handing it back to Kāinga Ora to use for housing or not in their own time frame, which may or may not be prompt, looking at some of the other spaces in the city that have had Kāinga Ora housing on and haven't yet been redeveloped. So ultimately, I think that it would be very wise to consult the community, and I anticipate there'll be quite a high level of demand for this sort of space, and I wouldn't like to see it lost to community. So I'd encourage us to go down this route first. Thanks.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, very comfortable with the recommendation and would have been happy to second. My thinking here, I think, and Councillor Naylor covered this in her questions, is that I feel I don't have enough information at this stage to make a determination apart from to look at what the community might want to do with that space. And they may well come back and say housing is what they think it could be best used for, but at the moment I don't know that, and in fact received a message yesterday from a member of the community who's very onto it with reading the council agenda papers to say that she started her dance school in that hall many years ago and was very interested to know what council were thinking and being involved in that process. So there is a level of community interest in how we use this space and this kind of space. And I think my reflection is that we've been very forward-thinking in our response to the housing crisis, and no question that there is one, but there are multiple competing demands that we have to meet for our community, and housing is one of them, but access to green space and community space is also a demand that we want to try and meet for our community. So I'm comfortable with going out to the community to see what they think about that. And also had some of the same concerns that Councillor Johnson has mentioned about if we move down revoking the reserve status, we lose control of this piece of land and this process. It becomes an issue of what the Crown thinks is the best use for that land. And I'm sure they would ask us what we think, but we just become another party to that process. So I'm comfortable at this stage to investigate and then see what happens next. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very much along the lines of support that have begun to be drawn by Councillor Johnson and Councillor Bowen. Land where we have control and flexibility near village centres is particularly important for us, and especially as we look to a city that is building in and up in the future, that is only going to become more important, and I would hate to see us trade something away now. So I'm quite comfortable with the proposal that's there in the recommendation, and would expect that the pursuit of that would have a strong future-focused lens on it as well, because as more and more intensification comes in, especially around village centres, space where we have flexibility and open space are going to be incredibly important.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In line with everybody else, basically, but one of the things I'd like to comment on is the amount of community groups that are lining up for space in the city. We have a hall there that's going to be sold off or vacated, at least by the guides. Now, how many community groups would there be that be interested in that space? We had a scout hall in Takaro, and we literally had groups fighting over the use of it. You know, we have another hall here that I could think of probably 4 or 5 groups that would just jump at the chance of taking it over. You know, why on earth would we look at putting down houses when we have got community groups desperate for space? We need houses, without doubt, but we also need community space. And in this case, I think community space must be put first.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I was definitely in two minds about this coming into the meeting today. Given the lack of community view that we have to help inform this decision, and perhaps needing to progress one of these options. And there's no doubt that any sort of community facility or green space, there'll always be a group in the community that will put their hand up to use it. I think without that community facilities review to give us objective information, it is difficult to make a really well-informed decision on this. I think my preference would have been to be able to see that facilities review and have that objective framework to help inform this decision. However, and also having attended the housing meeting yesterday and hearing the long lists of people waiting for appropriate housing in the city elevates that need very acutely in my mind. But in terms of having to progress one, I feel that if we progress the first option that has been proposed by Councillor Johnson, that still does retain the ability for the community voice if there is a view that housing is the higher priority. However, if we went with B, I think that would limit the community voice about the need for its use in a recreational way. So yes, I will be supporting option A for this.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with all the speakers. And the thing I don't agree is everybody's ask the community if there is need. I think there is already recognized need by the community. Only last night I attended a community function by a group who couldn't get booking in any of the community centers in the town, and they have to book the IPC hall. And there were about 30, 40 cars going from the city to IPC. And I would ask Brent to calculate the amount of carbon dioxide these cars have emitted. So my point is, if they were in the town, many of them would have walked to the venue. They wouldn't have used the cars. So there is a demand, there is a requirement. So I'm fully supporting this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, would you like a right of reply?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. That concludes comments, so I will invite you to vote. I'll just read out the recommendation. So it is that council instruct the chief executive to investigate the level of community demand for recreation and community use with a view to retaining Pinako Park and the Girl Guide Hall for community use. Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Finlay. I'll invite you to vote now. Can everyone just double check that they've voted, please? Great, that has carried 100%. Moving on to item 7, the Palmerston North Integrated Transport Initiative, and we've got Vanuka Nanayakara, Senior Transport Planner, and Lisa Mouldy, Regional Principal Transport Planner from Waka Kotahi Central North Island, to present that report.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, councillors, for this time. I'll take the report as read, but we'll give a short briefing before. I think there's varying sentiment around the table about I guess, our integration with Wakatahi and our other partners around the transport space. But ultimately, the PNITI program is effectively a cheat sheet for how we maximise our opportunities to get co-funding in future and how we work together as a integrated unit. PNITI is the city's really the first comprehensive and all-encompassing transport and land use strategy. It enables the city to achieve our long-term aspirations of being a key player in the regional, national and international supply chains and enabling some $8 billion in economic development investment over the next 2 decades. But it also ensures that while we can achieve those goals, that we also ensure that our residents maintain a high quality and standard of living, have safe and efficient access to education, employment and key services. For the first time, we have a clear and integrated land use and transport planning program, bringing together the work of PNCC, Waka Kotahi, Horizons Regional Council and the Manawatu District Council within one clear plan of action. PNITI is noted in our own transport plan as one of the key actions for the next 3 years and is also noted as the #1 highest priority activity within the Horizons Regional Council's Regional Land Transport Plan, which highlights how making progress on PNITI has major positive impacts for both Palmerston North and the wider region. PNITI is actually much more than a freight ring road. It's actually intended on informing all of our land use and transport work across the city. There's upwards of 70 individual planning projects that we will have to undertake with our partners across the next 5 to 10 years. All of that will be delivered across 8 packages, which are highlighted in Table 1 and Figure 1. We're seeking endorsement of the plan, upon which afterwards officers will work to align existing projects and programs under the PNITI program to ensure that we present the strongest possible case to achieve co-funding moving forward. The Waka Kotahi board have already endorsed the program and have expectations that all parties deliver in a timely manner, and a working group has been set up with officers from all parties to make sure that the work progresses. We intend on coming back to council with updates to the detailed program once we've developed enough information. Finally, given the importance of PNITI to the city, we strongly believe there's a need to bring the community along for the journey, and particularly how smaller projects such as the reallocation of road space, new bus stops, cycle lanes, that sort of thing, all contribute to a broader plan. So we have other comms teams from both PNCC and Wakatahi developing a comms and engagement plan. With that, I'll pass on to Lisa Mouldy from Wakatahi.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora koutou. I'm Lisa Maldi, the Regional Principal Transport Planner with Waka Kotahi. I'm here on behalf of the agency to voice our support for this piece of work. We've worked alongside PNCC and the other council partners for the past few years to map out the long-term vision for the transport network in the Palmerston North area. There's a lot of conflicting needs that we need to accommodate, whether it's efficiency of freight, the desire for Palmerston North to become a logistics hub, or simply supporting people to use other modes of transport, such as walking, cycling, and public transport to access where they live, work, and play. We believe that this program of work, which includes over 70 initiatives that would move forward over a long period of time, puts Palmerston North in a very good position to seek funding in the next NLTP and those going forward. Because it is a shared vision between the organizations, you're actually in a much better position than many of the other communities in the Central North Island. So hopefully you acknowledge the importance of this work, and we're looking forward to having endorsement of this.
Thank you. We do have a few questions. First up, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Fanuka. Thanks, Lisa, for being here to present and answer questions. Can I get firstly an understanding of the timing here? It sounds like Waka Kotahi Board saw this about 18 months ago. Can you just help us understand why it's only now that we're seeing it here?
Yeah, I can answer that, Councillor Barrett. So I guess the first thing is we have stood up a new transport planning function within strategic planning. So it's fair to say that we've been learning as we go about how best to play, in inverted commas, play the game in terms of working with Waka Kotahi. So you know, this PNITI was endorsed by the board, and then it went through the regional land transport plan process. So as Vanuka said, it was confirmed as the #1 priority within the regional land transport plan. And it's also regularly discussed at the Accessing Central New Zealand meeting. However, one of the things I think we've been reflecting on as we've been advancing along that transport planning journey is a lot of those strategic transport planning decisions that affect the city are either made by Waka Kotahi or at Victoria Ave. So we had an attempt, I guess, at socialising PNITI through some training with elected members, and there was what we'll maybe call a reasonable turnout at best. We've had some briefings, but certainly one of the things we've reflected on is the need to elevate the understanding and significance of PNITI around this table. And yes, it's probably taken us a little bit longer than what we would have liked, or I would have liked to kind of reach that point. But part of the driver for this report, as explained in the report, is to raise the understanding and profile of Piniti around this table so that we're better able, I guess, in terms of those future planning processes that are referenced in the recommendation around future annual budgets, annual budgets, long-term plans, district plans, all those things, this council is better able to make informed decisions as part of that process. So I think on reflection it should have come here earlier, but we've been I guess working it out as we go along as well. And as Lisa said, we're actually, with Piniti, further advanced than a lot of the other regions within the Central North Island. And as the report says, we've got an opportunity. I think what we're now doing is collectively working out how best we take that opportunity. And I think I've observed a number of reports and conversations around this table where I think we have lacked the integration that Piniti provides. So I think about the Ferguson Street Pit conversation. Those types of decisions, and there'll be hundreds of them, if not thousands, over the next 25 years, need to be made in the context of this document if we want to truly, I guess, receive the benefits of working with our funding partner. So a relatively long answer, I'm sorry, but it is something that we have been conscious of, and I think it's really important those Victoria Ave conversations also happen around here.
Thank you, David, for that context. So from that, is it safe to say that since it's the first time that it has come formally to council, that the the prioritization and the kind of overall balance of this is something that's come from officers' best efforts to work from strategic direction set through long-term plan, asset management plans, et cetera?
Yes, I would say so, and I think that's a continuing effort to align all of our work programs to ensure that we align with the strategic direction. PNITI is a high-level document, and it's a very outcomes focused document. Each of those 70 projects that I've indicated, some of which are already progressing in terms of land use planning or intersection upgrades around safety. All these projects do collectively give effect to that strategic direction set in the NRTP and I guess in the GPS, the RLTP, and our own long-term plan. But each of those projects will have their own opportunities to effectively go through that sieve and also go out for their own consultation and engagement processes to ensure that we align with what the community expects.
Thank you. Further question, Madam Chair, just I suppose building on the answer from the Chief Planning Officer around that we're learning to play the game, inverted commas. Can you give us a sense of, from an officer's perspective, kind of how this, how PNITI will evolve over time and how we as elected members would be involved in that evolution?
I think resorting, I guess, somewhat back to my earlier answer around that every one of those projects within the program would effectively have their own consultation and engagement processes, and most of those, if not all, would come back through the chamber to ensure that we would have alignment.
I agree with that, Vanuka, and I guess some of those, some of those more immediate projects that that are sort of underway. For instance, at the moment, the parking strategy being set within the context of Piniti, that would be something that comes through this committee. Vanuka's doing some work at the moment on priority routes, which we anticipate coming to this committee in September, which I know is something dear to the heart of councillors in terms of the heavy vehicle priority routes, which is again is all building on the strategic case within Piniti. But those types of processes we see coming through this committee and being set within the context of Piniti.
Thanks. I guess what I'm hearing there is, we get the chance to have a crack at individual projects in terms of the overall package and prioritization and how that evolves over time. Is there a view from officers at this stage around how elected members more address the global side of it?
I guess my answer to that is some of the immediate planning projects around the business cases for future investment in physical interventions. One of the elements of those will be identifying a prioritisation, or effectively identifying which projects we should deliver first, or in the short, medium and long term, based on a whole bunch of parameters. And some of that might be strategic and some of that might be technical feasibility as well. Again, the outputs of those business cases would absolutely come through this chamber for that evaluation, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. One final question, Madam Chair, if I might. Just wanted to really understand around the assessment process that sits in the documentation that we've been supplied with. My read of it, and I'd like to clarify if I've got it right, is that kind of the three scenarios that were shortlisted all had either neutral or negative effects in terms of environmental footprint. Is that in fact the case?
So something to keep in mind, and this may answer your question a bit, is, we have a GPS for land transport, and we have transport outcomes that are outlined by the ministry that we need to ensure that we achieve. And so programs of work need to be aligned with the GPS on a regular basis in order to receive funding. So essentially, I would anticipate that the Panini program would be a bit of a living document that would need to be refreshed and revised, or at least looked at from the new lens of the GPS each time those are issued. Climate change is actually one of the key factors in this current GPS, and I anticipate that will continue to be the case going forward. So it is something where we will need to take a look each time we have a new GPS, look at the prioritization, because essentially, funding decisions are made based on the projects being put forward in that GPS alignment. So in order to best position PNCC to receive that funding, we'll also just need to be sure that we think about that when we progress the program.
Thank you. So to finally clarify that then, given the current GPS has a strong signal around driving down emissions, and Pinati, as it has been assessed, if I'm reading it right, and I think I've had that confirmed, is at best neutral and possibly increasing emissions. Would the agency be willing to comment on how well aligned it is at this stage?
I think what I would say is the items that are early in the program would give us a clear understanding as to what the impacts might be. Because it is a program-level business case, we're looking at a strategic view, and as we go through, further investigation will be required on each component of that. So there will be an understanding, for example, with the ring road, what are the impacts, what are the benefits, and we'll have to review that through the lens of the GPS at that time. So it's really hard to say at this point in time because it's always a moving target to an extent. However, I do think that as it's written, those quick early pieces of work will give us a better steer as to what the actual impacts might be, particularly from a climate change standpoint, as all projects that are seeking funding through the NLTP need to indicate a VKT reduction and a reduction in transport emissions.
Thank you both, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just confirming that was your last question. Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Vanuka and Lisa. You mentioned taking the community with us, and you were both at the Bunnythorpe community meeting last night. And of course, they've got great concerns that they're going to have a state highway through their village. So how, as councillors, can we be confident that, you know, you're going to be communicating and working with them, you know, to make sure that they get the best outcomes for them as well?
Just speaking from a Wakakotaki standpoint, as I mentioned, we have wider transport outcomes that we aim to achieve aligned with the ministry and the DPS. I acknowledge that there are concerns in Bunnythorpe, particularly around the issues that would come with increased freight traffic through their community. Severance is an issue that we're actually trying to address throughout the country, which is, you know, challenges of trying to get to where you want to be safely because of increased traffic. I can assure you that we wouldn't be seeking to move on projects that would be a detriment to the community. And so we would want to go along on the journey with the community to understand what the challenges and opportunities are. As we expressed, this is a wider program, and each project underneath it will need to go through its own consultation and engagement. And that does mean that we would be talking to the communities directly impacted by those individual projects.
Okay. So, if I may, Madam Chair, so at what point with the ring road you haven't actually defined exactly where that's going to go? So in your timeline, when do you see that that will be defined?
The program for the work program for the P90I program is still being worked through, but we're stressing the need to progress on an indicative business case for the ring route, effectively identifying where the route will be, evaluating all the options available to us, investigating bypasses at Ashurst, Bunnythorpe, and also the second bridge crossing around Linton. Ultimately, what we have at the moment is really just a big line, a big thick line on a map, and we need to provide a much more clarity than that to our community, and effectively we'd be seeking to do that piece of work first.
Okay, thank you.
If I might add to that, there's a lot of interconnected challenges that are happening and playing out as we speak that require us to really progress on that piece of work early. Kakatanyata, for example, is within proximity of where the potential ring road might sit. And so there are other things that we need to get clarity on in order to progress other pieces of work. So definitely early in the program.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment too? There was talk about an indicative business case, and you'll see in the recommendation that we're talking about endorsing this to inform future decision making. So at the moment, Waka Kotahi has some funding available to us. I think it's $1.5 million allocated for some of those early PNITI projects. But this council, as part of future annual budgets and long-term plan, is going to need to think really carefully and hard about how it resources its contribution to those 70-odd actions that Vanuka talked about that sit within Piniti. So I would see Piniti being a major focus of the next long-term plan if we're to make real progress on the actions within it.
Right, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Vanuka, Lisa. So a couple of things. I actually thought we'd signed this off ages ago, but it seems to keep coming back. One, what has been done so far? Bearing in mind we've been in it a couple of years, or 18 months.
So the Wakakotahi board endorsed it in early 2021, and between now and then, effectively, as David said, we've been mobilising a new function within the organisation around transport planning. Part of the reason why we've come to council at this point is it's been a long process to get everyone on the same page and in the same room working together.
Sorry, why is that? I thought it was pretty detailed and straightforward that we all knew we were doing this.
Yes. Effectively, we needed to know the detail around what this was, effectively. So we knew that this was a priority in the RLTP, and we knew that it was a priority in our own long-term plan. However, we needed to know the further detail around what the individual actions were. Part of that is effectively we have limited budget and resource to progress some of that work, and we've come in the past to this council in different ways through, for example, the Better Off funding to look to progress some of this work as soon as we can. But ultimately, it is a question about limited resource and funding to be able to deliver some of this work.
Can I maybe add to that?
So you go, Lisa.
Okay. I was going to say Wakakotahi has already done some work on the State Highway 3 portion of the Piniti program. I would also, just to build on what Vanuka mentioned, the program outlined various outcomes that were trying to be achieved. For example, enabling streets for people in the city center. So that was essentially a bucket of funding that was identified and allocated. However, how we achieved that wasn't clearly outlined. So that's an exercise that we're working with PNCC on, is identifying what those discrete actions might be to ensure that we have a clear strategic vision for the network and understanding what improvements need to be done on which streets and which parts of the network to support that. So while there was strategic direction provided, some of that detailed information it still needs to be worked out.
And just to add to that, not all those 70 projects are new. Some of those projects are already projects that are in train, particularly some of the land use planning projects, the safety upgrades at intersections as well. We'll be coming to you at the next committee meeting around some of the work that's been done around strategic priority routes as well as part of that process.
Yeah, I guess don't have a lot to add. Lisa and Vanuka have covered it well, but I think one of the challenges, Mayor Smith, sorry, is in terms of progress, the reality is funding is a challenge. So look, I think the adoption or endorsement of Piniti by the Waka Board, the timing of that relative to the confirmation of our last long-term plan wasn't great. So we did, as officers, we're very keen to get on with a lot of those business cases. We put up some programs for you to consider as part of the Better Off package. So they, in terms of the information that was presented to Council, in terms of that $8 million, that wasn't prioritised in terms of the projects that were identified. So, as I said earlier, Piniti is going to need to be front and centre of the next LTP if we're to make real progress and take advantage of that opportunity that is presented by bringing together that land use and transport planning.
Yeah, just just back to that. So it's a regional, it's the #1 ranked program in the regional transport plan, and it's a national project, I would assume, if you want goods to be fed down to Wellington and everything else. So where are all the partners?
One thing I can say is we're in the process of putting together an application to the Transport Choices project, which the government have just released, $350 million to help fund our contributions to Piniti. Whether or not we're successful in that, it's the indications are, we had a brief meeting with MP Tangi Utikiri a week or two ago. Whether we're successful in that, it appears that they're looking for projects that are ready to go in terms of being projects that are ready to be built. But we've put an application into that. We also are in discussions with Sarah Downs regarding a potential change to the RLTP to sort of get some accelerated funding which doesn't require contribution from PNCC. So certainly from an officer's perspective, we're doing all we can to secure funding to advance this outside of the budgets that we currently have in the annual budget and LTP.
And can I add to that as well in terms of the work allocated to our partners? So effectively Wakatahi is leading a lot of that work around the safety interventions. We've obviously progressed on a lot of the land use planning work, and Horizons are progressing with the public transport aspect of it as well. We've effectively reached a point at which any further work requires resource, and Wakatahi have effectively put up money or resource to be able to do that. We just need to figure out internally how we also match that.
So just on that, sorry, Madam Chair. So although you've said it's just not a freight ring road project, in reality, it is the major player to unlock a lot of other stuff, including streets for people and all that sort of thing. So when does the first stage of that start? I'm just thinking of all the complaints I get around potholes and everything else, and it would be nice to be able to publicly say that there is going to be something happening from not only our own people, but from our partners.
Yeah, well, two of the first cabs off the rank in the program that we're trying to push are effectively communicating this program effectively with the public. So there's a greater level of public understanding around what the overall picture is for transport and land use. And in addition to that, it's, as I said before, it's the progressing the business case for the ring route itself. So the report that you'll see, the condensed 140-page report in the committee report, is effectively endorsement of or explanation of the program. The business case for the ring route is effectively doing technical investigations around where the optimal route lies and when the phasing occurs and when it will be implemented. So before we do that work, we wouldn't be able to say with any certainty when and what and how, but effectively that piece of work is critical to having that clarity.
Okay, I've explored that enough. Thank you. Just my final question, Madam Chair. Does this include, or is it connected to speed limits? And i.e., Kiki Whenua, and this is probably more to Wakakotahi, when will we find out what's happening there? Because that is stalling a whole lot of shovel-ready development.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't speak directly to any specific projects as I sit in the strategic transport planning space. However, the the range of measures that we're looking at with this program cover everything. So we have an intervention hierarchy that covers everything from demand management, optimization, low-cost measures, all the way up to infrastructure being the last thing that we consider, because it is challenging to get funding on a national level for those types of projects. So the easiest things that we can move on is speed changes. There's speed management plans that are in the works currently, along with councils and state highways. So that is underway. That will continue to be at front of mind is those easy measures that we can use to also reprioritize how people might travel on the network.
Yeah, and in addition to that, our speed limit review process is actually part of one of the packages in PNITI, and it's something that's already ongoing. Resource to enable us to deliver a revised speed management plan in time for the new rule that comes in the next couple of years. That was actually part of the Better Off package. But effectively we're trying to resource that to effectively get traction on that as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Monica and Lisa. Look, I've just got a couple of tidy up questions. Can you just tell us, just in terms of, we're being asked today to formally, sorry, this has got a lot of echo going on here. Are we able to fix that?
We can hear you fine. You can continue.
Right, no, the echoing has actually stopped now, which is great. Thanks, it's a little bit off-putting. So we're being asked today to actually endorse this. Can you just tell us what's the state of the other key stakeholders? Have they all endorsed at this point?
Wakakatahi and well, most of the tasks in the program are allocated to ourselves and Wakakatahi. The Wakakatahi board have endorsed it in 2021, so effectively it's up for us to endorse it now. There's only a couple of tasks for our other partners, and effectively they're progressing on those pieces of work anyway. Horizons have effectively endorsed it in part through the RLTP as the #1 priority project for the region as well.
I would also add that we are regularly meeting as a group, including Manawatu District Council and Horizons, discussing progress of the program. So everyone is bought in and on board with this work.
But at this point in time, there doesn't appear to be any formal endorsement process with the other key partners?
No, I think as Vanuka and Lisa said, the Wakakatahi board have approved Pinity, the document that's on the order paper, and Horizons Regional Council have effectively endorsed it because it's through their regional land transport plan, because it's the #1 priority project. So the two key partners, Wakakatahi and Horizons Regional Council, whether the words endorse or approve, have prioritised this as a project.
Okay, thanks. And just secondly, and just very quickly, Vanuka, you mentioned report back to council. Can you give us some idea of what that might look like, which committee you might report back to?
Point of clarification, is that specifically about the report I indicated for next month, or just the ongoing reporting?
Ongoing reporting. It's it's obviously a very big project with lots of reach. So some understanding of timelines and what that report back might look like would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I think effectively we would seek to report back on every one of those 70 projects. So it really is dependent on when we can resource and complete those projects. Some of those projects are, as I said, ongoing. So some of the land use plan change work, cycling master plan progress, public transport, that sort of thing. So we would seek to come back to this committee frequently.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just seeking a bit of sort of information in terms of what we're going to be asked to endorse. On page 45, there's a diagram that shows the project extent. Are you happy that that project extent meets our requirements? Because when the Tararua Highway opens up in 2024, there's going to be a lot of heavy goods movement that's going to come through Ashurst heading for Colleton Road, primarily because they want to avoid fielding. And I don't see anything there that addresses that particular issue.
I'm happy to speak to that. So there is an Accessing Central New Zealand business case that also was underway with PNITI having this project boundary as part of their program as well. So that business case covers outside of the Piniti boundary, and we're constantly looking across the two programs to ensure continuity.
Just to confirm then, in this, what we're going to be endorsing in terms of heavy freight movements, what action are you putting in place that with the opening of the Tararua Highway in 2024, that State Highway 57 is going to fall to bits with the heavy goods movement on there?
So as part of that longer-term, wider program, there is a piece of work around State Highway 56 and 57, and understanding how we might detune 56, begin to make improvements on 57 in order to shift that to a more appealing route and a more suitable route. So that's also identified in the Accessing Central New Zealand business case. So it's supported through both options.
Right. Next question, Madam Chair. On page 78, under the freight network level of service issues, there's a statement at the bottom there that given that recent growth has outpaced model projections and current forecasts do not include all of Council's growth areas, the 2041 forecasted issues could occur 5 to 10 years sooner than previously anticipated. So when is that going to be clarified or determined?
We're working, we've been working over the past year to look at options of updating our transport modelling tools in our toolbox. Unfortunately, that's, again, something that doesn't have resource at the moment, and we're investigating all other options to do that. It was one of the actions within the Better Off transport planning bid. So we would work exhaust all means to basically resource that piece of work so we can get clarity as soon as we can.
I would also add that in the meantime, we're working very closely with Jono and David and the other teams. So we have an environmental planning team as well. So we're really trying to merge this across our teams and ensure that there's continuity between our planning and land use teams and transport, because things are happening quite quickly.
And a final question, Madam Chair. On page 96, Kiwi Rail Terminal Relocation. The time frame is 10 to 20 years, and the comment states the timing of this relocation will impact on the timing of the projects that are recommended in this report. So when is the terminal relocation going to occur?
So all the advice we've had from Kiwirel is that they would like to start construction within 10 years.
10 years. So whilst we talk about the endorsing this report, there's a hiatus, is there, of 10 years until we wait till the terminal does come or not?
No, I think as Vanuka and Lisa have pointed out, there's a whole heap of actions which actually the early actions within Piniti are actually focused on the urban part of the network, not those pieces at the edge in terms of the connection through to the ring road. So obviously the Key Rail Freight Hub will be a key driver for the ring road, but actually the headline message within Piniti is start on the urban part of the network and changes to that.
I would also add that that ring road business case, being one of the first projects within the program to get underway, will help guide the conversation around the freight hub as well, if we can have an understanding as to where that might be located.
One final question. So what is the projected time frame for the construction of the ring road?
I think we wouldn't be able to outline a timeframe with any certainty unless we progress with the business case and the transport model. Effectively, we need to investigate all different development scenarios, undertake feasibility assessments, and do modelling to effectively have the best estimate of that. So, as we said before, those are the bits of work in this program that we really need to progress as soon as we can.
I would also add that major construction projects are likely to fall later in the program, and this is a 30-year program, so it is hard to put a time frame with certainty at this point in time.
One final question, Madam Chair.
Councillor, I don't think you know what the word final means, but you're welcome to ask another question.
The answers actually add a further flavour. In terms of reading this document, I was looking at what future-proofing was in it. And I look at the intersections and a lot of emphasis on safety and road safety there, but I don't see anything in terms of considering overpasses at some of these critical junctions of the ring road.
Again, we're just not at that point in time, and that level of detail will be hashed out when that business case is completed. Also, infrastructure being one of the last tools in our tool belt to use, we will be exploring other options in the meantime. So it's a bit difficult to speculate on.
And in addition to that, part of the work that we'll be doing as part of this program is to investigate all of our options. Wakatahi has an intervention hierarchy which outlines that infrastructure interventions are the last resort, and better use of our existing assets and better ways to manage demand will always come first. We would look to exhaust all of those options before resorting to an infrastructure solution.
I would also, I'd like to add that as we expect this to be a living document, that the data and evidence would be refreshed on a regular basis, at least in line with RLTP timeframes, so we can have a good estimate as to what the actual impacts are on the ground and what the projections are looking like.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You'll be pleased to hear I only have one question. Thanks,
So
Monica
far.
and Lisa. And I shall stick to that. I guess other councillors have already been contacted by residents, that are impacted by the lines on the map. And I just wonder what you think we should or could be saying to them, because I've had one lady say, her farm has been in the family for 100 years and now it's going to have a road through it. And, if we're endorsing this, it really is just is it just an approximation of what might happen? Or, when are those people going to get certainty, I guess, I suppose, is the question.
Yep, and that's a good question. One of the things we're working on at the moment with Wakatahi is developing a comms and engagement plan, and part of that is to identify how best we communicate what is effectively a strategic program level program. The lines on the map probably in retrospect indicate certainty when there is no real certainty, and we need to progress on a lot of other investigative and engagement work to pinpoint a line on a map. The intent of the PNITI program is to achieve the outcomes that's been indicated in the report. Ultimately, in terms of where the ring road will go, for example, we couldn't say that in certainty. We just know that there is an intent to move, particularly that regional heavy freight movements around the city rather than through.
I would also add that endorsement of this is essentially endorsement of the higher level vision that we're trying to achieve, and that is increasing freight efficiency and creating a city center where it's safer and easier for people to move about, regardless of which mode of travel they would like to use. The individual projects, again, will be consulted on with the community on a project-by-project basis, so there will be plenty of opportunity to engage with them specifically on the details. However, I do think we've been holding off on that comms and engagement plan for the program until we get endorsement, and I think it's really critical that we get that underway. And in fact, we have a bit of funding to act on that as soon as we actually get endorsement of this program, because we do think that socializing it internally as well as externally with the community will help paint that long-term vision. This is essentially the Let's Get Williams Moving from Palmerston North, for example, a collective group of improvements that gets things moving for the next 30 years and serves the communities long-term. So I'm hoping that's what we're looking at as far as endorsement goes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vinuka and Lisa. That concludes questions. So, councillors, we've got a recommendation in front of us that council endorse the Palmerston North Integrated Transport Initiative, PINITI, as a key strategic document to inform future transport and land use decisions, including future district plan changes, asset management plans, annual budgets and long-term plans. I'll move that. Seconded by the Mayor, thank you, and I'll open up for any comments. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just want to thank the officers and Waka Kotahi. I actually thought we'd endorse this, but it seems we haven't. And I suppose that does lead me to some frustration that we're having this discussion, which seems to be ongoing. And look, please, I'm not shooting the messengers here, but it is incredibly frustrating that this is taking so long. I advocated for this some time ago, in fact, several years ago, and 18 months ago it was endorsed by the region, and it was the #1 ranked by some margin project in the regional transport plan, and yet zero has really been done in physical works. And nothing's really visible, which is really frustrating for our residents, as I'm sure all of you around the room are getting multiple calls about what is smashing our network with heavy transport. And that comes through this 169-page report, and it's very detailed, but it's almost too detailed. And I appreciate the plans, the strategy, the business cases, which seem to go on and on, but we've got to start doing something. This is a massively important project for the city, actually for the lower North Island, and I'm somewhat bemused that the partners don't get this in Wellington. We must get some action. We deserve some investment for this project. You know, Hamilton Bay of Plenty got masses more investment than we have. Yes, they've got people and more population, but actually it's our turn. We pay taxes, we pay petrol taxes, we pay road user fees. We have the second largest volume of freight going through us for Kiwi Rail. We should be getting this investment. So the continued underinvestment delay will have a domino effect. I hate to say it, but there's a whole lot of risk here too. Kiwi Rail, the Central New Zealand Te Ū Tanganui distribution hub, and it will only happen with connections. So the sooner we get going, the better. This is a project of national, I believe, national significance, so it should be pan-party. I hear the GPS trotted out every time, and I'll be honest, that changes with the wind. And really, we've all got to agree this is a project. Yes, we need to have a lens over efficiency, climate, emissions, etc. But actually, nothing will happen if we just keep going back to the what the Minister thinks of the day. So please, I implore the partners, please get on with it, because we have so much opportunity here, but also so much at risk. So please start. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it has been really good to see this come to committee and to get some clear interest and engagement from elected members on it. And clearly, I'm of the view that council input earlier in the process would have been fantastic, and acknowledge the Chief Planning Officer's comments in that regard. This is an initiative that I really, really, really want to like. I really want to champion it. I want to make sure that, you know, we are planning for our future transport needs, but to be honest, I'm finding it a bit hard. It has been in development for a number of years, and it does have some good elements in it. It's got some good outcomes signaled, but it falls down by lacking balance. It's the strategic settings and balance that I'm fundamentally concerned about, because for all of the years that Pinati has been in development, we have had clear strategic direction around driving down emissions. And we know that transport is the prime source of emissions. And yet we're at this stage where we've got a package that signals a long-term emissions increase, and it's that lack of strategic alignment that is what is most concerning to me in this case. We're talking about 30 years. These are the 30 years where we get through to 2050, which is where the country is intended and must be sitting at carbon neutral. And to not have the alignment that we need at the outset to drive down emissions through our transport planning is, to me, a grave concern. We need to be asking the hard questions. If we're going to put $300 to $400 million coming into this region, we need to ask the hard questions about how we can ensure that that investment happens in a way that drives down emissions. So I do acknowledge that it's a very well-intentioned initiative, that it has a number of good elements in it, that a huge amount of effort has gone into it. But fundamentally, it is too weakly geared in terms of driving down emissions, and that, Madam Chair, is my concern.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other comments? Great, I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 12 in favour and 1 against. We are going to break for morning tea, so we'll resume the meeting at 11 a.m. Just about to resume. Can we just double check that everyone online can hear us okay? Perfect, thumbs up, thank you. All right, welcome back everyone. So moving on to item 8. We're on page 171 and we have got the update on the options and value proposition of providing free bus fares for priority groups. This report is going to be presented by Finuka, welcome back, and Mark Reid, Manager Transport Services from Horizons Regional Council.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, councillors. We will take this report as read and happy to answer any questions.
Perfect, thank you. We'll open up for questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for being here. With an eye to the second recommendation, the report outlines in 4.2 quite a bit of work that, in the officer's view, needs to be done to kind of progress things. So, given that would be quite a body of work in its own right, would you see value in getting I guess, a bit of a straw poll from the community in terms of broadly whether this is an area of interest?
I think there would be value. What we're mindful of is a lot of work going on at the moment at the regional and national level around this topic, whether it's free fares, reduced fares, or the recipients being all of public transport users or certain priority groups. I think our best course of action at the moment is to allocate resources for focusing on known significant barriers to public transport in the city, some of which are around the service, so effectively what sits under Horizons' remit around the quality of the service, coverage, patronage, all that sort of thing, and then the work that PNCC are doing at the moment in terms of upgrading the supporting infrastructure. We'd also, as the report indicates, we'd seek to work very closely with Horizon on the upcoming fare review process. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think, Mark, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to say, obviously, the policies that have gone recently into our regional public transport plan, and that's a plan that is going to our Passenger Transport Committee next Tuesday to be endorsed, and then through to our full Horizons Council later in the month to be adopted. So while it is draft, you can take it as being close to final. Really signals where we're going around that fare review side. And obviously we've signalled that to be happening early next calendar year. And would certainly be hoping to engage with our various stakeholders, including council here, around what that looks like.
Thank you. So from Horizons' point of view, having community input into that process broadly helpful, unhelpful?
I guess we'll be conscious of the fact that we have recently consulted on the Regional Public Transport Plan, and while that included policies around fares, I am conscious that it didn't specifically ask people, what do you think of this fare policy? It asked, what do you think of our whole plan? So I'd say it's probably to be determined as to the extent of consultation with the public through that process.
Great, thank you both, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a question related to Table 4 on page 179 of transport revenue. Apologies if I've missed this somewhere, but is there no rates, Horizons rates, that contributes towards public transport?
Sorry, yes there is. So our total cost for the service in Palmerston North is about 4.4 million. So sorry, if ideally we would have shared the information that included that line with Finuka for input into his table. So it's about 1.3, 1.4 million is the Horizons rates contribution.
Okay, thanks. That makes a bit more sense.
Councillors, are there any other questions? No, thank you very much, Mark and Vinuka. So we've got a recommendation to receive the report, and we do have a second recommendation which has been moved and seconded come through. So I'll just quickly read those out. So number 1 is that the committee received the report titled Update on the Options and Value Proposition of Providing Free Bus Fares for Priority Groups for Information. And number 2, that Council consult with the community on zero fare urban bus services in the annual budget 23-24 process. So that has been moved by Councillor Barrett and seconded by Councillor Johnson. I will go to you, Councillor Barrett, for comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the officers, both at Horizons and City Council, for bringing us the report and context that it sits in terms of what's happening in the public transport planning space. It's certainly been an interesting year in terms of transport and the public transport side of it, between the potholed roads, roads getting a bit more crowded, the price of petrol, access to parking. We know that there's a lot of interest in the community around getting the transport network working a heck of a lot better than it is today. The other thing that we've seen is that the half-price fares have been particularly effective at actually boosting bus patronage. We've seen a weaker signal locally than we have in other centres around New Zealand, but clearly price is part of the solution, one of the levers that we could pull if we do want to get more people on the buses, free up more road space for other users, and get all those benefits. So in my view, it's time that we do, lift our gaze and see what ways we might design and use the transport network in the future. But before diving into that, what I'd like us to do is get some community feedback on the schedule through City Council on this. I understand that there's coordination that needs to happen and already is happening between city and regional authorities. In my view, this is, a conversation that as a city we can and should lead with our community in terms of how it influences and interfaces with the wider transport system. And I'd just encourage you to support us going out and asking the community simply what do they think. Now, the reason that it's signaled for sitting alongside a budget process is so that it doesn't add a lot of cost or complexity. It could actually be tested there in an in-principle level. I'm not saying that we would need to work up a whole lot of budgets and programs to support it. It could be simply an in-principle question that is asked during that budget process that would inform future long-term plans. I think it's a useful time with the amount of challenges that the transport network is facing to check in with the community and see if this is one option that they would like us to explore or not. The report, it really struck me in the report, the remarkable tiny fraction of investment that's actually garnered from fares. It's less than 10% of the overall budget to run the system. And when you're that close to actually having the ability to go zero fares, I think it's well worth asking that question. It's in terms of the actual dollars that would be required, it's less than, well, it's about 5% of the current parking revenue that we enjoy. So it's actually quite a small hurdle to clear to actually get a zero fare bus service going. Other cities around the world, including one of our sister cities, are doing it. And again, it's timely that we check in and ask the community in principle, is this somewhere we'd like to go? So I'd ask for your support so that we can get that question to the community. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, no, I would ask for your support on this, councillors. I think we need to change what we're doing in terms of transport because we're not getting the reduction in private vehicle use that we want. And I think there are different things that we can try. We certainly tried unsuccessfully to tighten up parking, and that really didn't go down very well. So I think we'd be very wise in this situation to check in with the community to see if this is a direction that they would support. There are a whole lot of advantages, and a lot of them are outlined in the report, of increasing public transport use. And if we could get more people to take journeys on buses, not only does it have a climate benefit, but it also has a reduction in wear on the roads benefit and a reduction in terms of traffic congestion. So, there's potentially a lot of benefit to be gained here, possibly from small investment. But rather than just plough on with it, I think it would be sensible to just hear from the community whether this is a direction they would support. We know that about a quarter of our emissions as a city come from transport, and we're going to have to do something to try and address those. So to me, it seems we're going to have to be a little bit more adventurous in the things that we do to try and get some shift in how people travel around the city. So let's at least see what people think about this and potentially work this up through an annual plan consultation progress. Thanks.
Just a brief comment from me. I'm happy to support both of these recommendations as well. Through the recent LGNZ AGM, there was also a remit put up around supporting free bus fares for priority groups, which passed with a lot of support, some very strong support across the country. And so as a result, LGNZ are now going to also be advocating for this at a national level as well. I certainly think that it'd be worthwhile to be having the conversation at a local level to initiate that. As has been mentioned in previous items today, we don't always know the timing of government-led pieces of work, and so actually I think we can get the ball rolling to align it with the annual budget as well. Makes a lot of sense, especially if there are going to be any initial budgetary implications. So very supportive of this. I think this is the direction that things are going in terms of trying to shake up transport modes. So yeah, let's encourage support on that. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, can we separate them, please?
Yeah, when we vote, we can separate them.
Okay, cool. Look, I'll comment just on both. Look, thank you for the report, and I think it highlighted. I'll take you to 2.24 because there's been some comments contrary to it. The total patronage has dropped significantly since the start of COVID-19 pandemic. The half-price fares, which have worked very well in the metro centres, unfortunately just haven't taken hold here. And look, I'm fine with asking the community, but this isn't our space. It isn't our space. Why are we taking on more burden for the ratepayers? And I can remember when I voted against the Aotearoa Collective for Public Transport Equity campaign. Firstly, they never came and asked me, but secondly, I knew this would come. It was code for the ratepayers would be paying for it. I wrote down, a couple of you stated there would be no ratepayer subsidisation or contribution. In fact, Councillor Barrett stated that there'd be no ratepayer contribution. But now it looks like there is going to be. I appreciate that you all want to lower emissions and everything straight away, but this is a government space, it's a regional space. Why does the city have to continually pick up things? It's code for ratepayers are going to pay for everything. And I'm sorry, I can't support it unless the mover and the seconder wants to swap out the councils and we go to Horizons, who actually look after the space, and we ask them. Effectively, we'll be paying for it because they rate us as city ratepayers. But so I won't be supporting it. I'm sorry. We're going down some rabbit holes.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do actually have a question related to the second recommendation, and it perhaps similar to some of the comments that the Mayor has made. The answer to the question in terms of the revenue on table 4 from the officers was that there was about 1.4 million that came from Horizons. I guess that I'm trying to work out that if we are the ones that consult on it through our annual budget, would it not be the Horizons budget that's affected by the outcome of that consultation? And if so, should we be having a conversation with them or working in partnership? I guess I'm seeking a comment from an officer, or if either of the mover or seconder had any clarity to put on that, it would be useful.
Well, the officer report talked about the fact that we would propose to work with the regional council as part of their fare review next year. But I think if the council wanted to, if the city council wanted to subsidise free fares and presumably that could be done by way of a grant from the city to the regional council. Or it may be that the regional council decide to pick that up if there's some submissions and, yeah.
So I had understood that the regional council was also endorsed the free fares proposal. So do we have an understanding of whether they will be consulting on this specifically to seek feedback from the community, and whether that will have an impact on their budget, or whether there was any intention for them to fund this if there was to be any change?
We'll invite our friend from Horizons back to answer that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess Horizons supported or endorsed the National Free Fares campaign. I guess on the proviso that is fully funded by government, or in support of that being fully funded by government, so not trying to set a direction that would be funded by Horizons or Horizons ratepayers. In terms of free fares, as I said, we do have a fare structure review next year. Free fares across the board or priority groups could be part of that consideration. I would say there is not strong policy support through our regional public transport plan to move in that direction. And we would be probably saying if that is something that City Council would like to support, then I guess we would see that as you looking to ask that question with your ratepayers and fund that, and as the Chief Planning Officer said, perhaps providing that funding to Horizons through a suitable mechanism, be it a grant or direct funding in response to what patronage could look like.
Okay, thank you. So just following on, I can't see the wording, and it wasn't circulated prior to the meeting, of that second recommendation, but is the intent by the mover and seconder for, if there was a view from the community to have free fares, was the intent for that to be funded through PNCC ratepayers, or is there an intent to seek government funding to enable that?
Councillor Barrett, could you respond, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Naylor, for the question. I've gone with, have gone with a deliberately open wording so that we don't lock ourselves into one path or another. It may well come that we simply ask the question at an in-principle level, does the community want to see this explored? I'm not at the stage in my thinking, and I don't think we've had enough community input to know even if there is interest, and then if there is interest, should it be something that is funded through rates? Should it be something that's funded through other sources of revenue? Should it be something that's funded out of central government? I think all those things are to come. The question is simply to the community, in principle, is this a direction that they would like to see explored?
Thank you.
We've got, we do have others in line for comment, but I just want to check if there are any other questions, particularly because recommendation 2 is additional. I don't want to be jumping between comments and questions. Have we got a signal from anyone online if they have any questions, or is everyone in for comment? We're in comment, but people are asking. Okay, it looks like everyone's in for comments, so we'll continue. Councillor Dingwall. Yep, we've just switched screens. We've got you up, but we can't hear you. Are you? Sorry, bear with us for one moment. Councillor Harper, can I get you to just say something so we can test if it's in where the issue sits? No, we can't hear you either. Okay. No, don't worry, we've got a technology upgrade in the budget. We'll just go to Councillor Beattie, and we're just going to work on our colleagues online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I can't support this. I like the idea in principle, but Horizons are the transport, regional transport, and I pay my rates. I'm hit by Palmerston North rates and Horizons. So I do not want us going down the pathway of duplicating what we pay Horizons for. We have 4 city councillors, Horizons councillors on that council. So we should be making sure that when we're supporting them for this election, that this is something that we want to go to for free transport. So I would be happy to support this if you change it to advocate for Horizons to advocate free free buses, so that the Palmerston North ratepayers are not going to pick up this. I mean, look at, we've talked about our rates. We cannot free transport it if it was supported in Palmerston. There's a whole lot of funding that would have to go to it. And I hear the word grant, which means that's going to impact Palmerston North ratepayers. And if Horizons don't pick this up and our ratepayers say, yes, we'd love it, that means that we have no statistics on how many people would use it. There could be costs of having to bring in new buses. I mean, there's just no costings or anything of this at all. So I think that we should push the government and Horizons, which is where it sits, not with the Palmerston North City Council, and certainly our staff are under-resourced to be able to do more community consultation, even if it is with the annual budget. So let's push Horizons to be doing what they need to do, and we stick to our business. Thank you.
Our next 3 speakers are all online. So let's go back to Councillor Dingwall and see if we can... No. Okay. We're still testing the waters online, so we'll go over to Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I would like to move an amendment to that second recommendation. I can't see the wording, but basically to amend to ask Horizons to consider consulting on free bus fares as a part of their fares review. The reason being that I do, in principle, believe that this is something worth exploring with the community. I agree with other speakers that it's not primarily the city's responsibility to fund, but I wouldn't like to shut down that conversation and vote against this resolution, because I do, in principle, believe that that would be a worthwhile thing to explore. So the wording, as Councillor Beattie has been indicated that she would second that amendment, that council ask Horizons to consider consulting on free bus fares as a part of their fares review.
Madam Chair, just a point of order. Does that not substantially change the amendment so that it's actually something different altogether?
Thank you. We will consider that. Just going to pause for a moment.
It's the same action, but by somewhere different.
So standing orders are silent on changing the substance of an amendment. It only speaks to being a direct negative, so the amendment can stand.
Okay. Alternatively, if you think it's tidier, I'm happy, Councillor Beattie and I would be happy to move a further recommendation if this one fails. But if you're happy with the amendment, we'll go with that.
Let's go with the notice of motion that if the recommendation fails, that an alternative motion will be put.
Oh, you're going to do it as an amendment? Oh, sorry. We'll stick with the amendment if you've allowed it.
Okay. Have we got the amendment in writing? All right, we have an amendment in front of us. Councillor Naylor, are there any other comments you want to make about the amendment? Okay, we've cleared the speaking queue. If you would like to speak to the amendment, please use your device, jump in the queue. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the fundamental drive for me here is to get the question in front of the community. My preference, and strong preference, is that we would do that as a city and be a bit more masters of our own destiny, at least in terms of the engagement process. You know, Horizons is a big beast that has quite a large geographic span and representation. While there are 4 voices from the city, they're well and truly in the minority relative to the balance of elected members in that council. So the original thinking and interest from me, which I maintain, is that as a city, we would do better to actually have an engagement process that comes from the city and connects with our community and that's driven by us. So for that reason, I'd urge you to consider supporting the substantive rather than this amended process, which potentially significantly dilutes the information coming to us.
I'm just going to read out the recommendation with the amendment for our colleagues online because we are having some issues with visibility. So the amendment results in the recommendation now reading that Council ask Horizons to consider consulting with the community on zero-fare urban bus services, and the amendment was moved by Councillor Naylor and seconded by Councillor Beattie. Okay, just briefly, I'm going to oppose the amendment. For me, it doesn't give enough certainty around engaging with the community on this topic. It's all well and good for us to direct this back to Horizons, where I appreciate that this is their domain, but the council asking Horizons as a recommendation doesn't give any certainty to that actually happening. In actual fact, in my mind, that's a quick conversation in which Horizons may turn around and say, no, thank you. And then this conversation does not happen. I believe that it is our job to advocate for our community, and so we have an opportunity to do that. The original motion included the annual budget as a mechanism to do that, so it wasn't an additional resource or time to allocate to it. It was actually using an existing process, so I'll be opposing the amendment. Right, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll also be opposing the amendment because it really has substantially changed the motion that I originally seconded. So the whole point of consulting is to consult with our community about things that we can do as a city council to help reduce carbon emissions. And I'm not sure that people have really been paying attention if they're saying that this is something that isn't our business. One of our 4 strategic goals is to reduce carbon emissions across the city. That is our core business. And unless we start doing things differently, we're not going to be achieving those goals. And all we're really suggesting is a consultation with the community about one way of potentially reducing carbon emissions. And I think if people are reluctant to even consult on this, I'm not quite sure if they're understanding what we've committed to as a council in terms of carbon emissions reduction. So I would ask you to please vote against the amendment and we'll go back to the substantive. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there's a hierarchy for consulting here. First of all, we are Horizons ratepayers. So if Horizons pick this up, all the same Palmerston North ratepayers and Horizons are one and the same, plus the additional members they have on the council. We are coming, I've repeated before, we are coming up to an election. So this is a good time to actually, if we want this, is to actually put this in Horizons court. And if they come back and say no, well, then we have a second process that we can pick it up ourselves. But at this stage, we need to manage our own budgets and our own resources. So the first step is to go to Horizons, say to Horizons, this is what the Palmerston North City Council wants. If they come back to us and say, no, we're not going to be considered, then there's another step. But what happens if they come back and says, yes, we've got government backing on this, we will go out and do what you say. That means we don't have to put up any ratepayers' money or any of our resource. So to me, it's just the first step. And if that takes us out of budget and resource, I'm happy to do that. At the end of the day, we will get this outcome, but it just needs to be the right stepping stones to get there.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a question type of comment that whether there is anything which binds Horizons when we say look into this, is there anything which binds Horizon to definitely do it?
No. The recommendation is to ask Horizons, so essentially it's putting it back into their court to determine whether they will do that or not.
So that means we don't have any assurity that it will happen. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Just a comment on the amendment there. Like Councillor Beattie, there is a hierarchy here, and actually it is the same community. Last time I checked, I got a Horizons bill, as everyone around this table did. So actually it's the same community, because there has been comments that it's different communities. It isn't. It's the same community. Yes, it'll come from somebody different, and I think Councillor Butt was right to ask that question. Will Horizons ask? It's totally in their camp, but as Councillor Beattie said, this is a good time to have that conversation around elections. And look, this shouldn't be our domain. It's not our space, unless councillors want to run the buses. This is very much Horizons space. That's why we've got Horizons offices here, and via government funding, they put on public transport. We support it with some infrastructure, but that's our role. Otherwise, we will be subsidising this. And again, I just don't think that is our space. So please support the amendment, because at least it gets the conversation going to the same community, and we go from there.
Right, Councillor Dingwall. We'll see if we can go to you.
Excellent. Testing.
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. So thank you, Madam Chair. Just speaking to the amendment, I will not support this amendment for a lot of the reasons that actually Madam Chair announced. I think part of it is when we're looking at what our community needs, I don't think we've ever actually asked that question directly. You know, I don't think we've actually said to our Palmerston North City residents, do we want a free zero fee bus service? And I think it is kind of in line with the things that we're trying to do with the cycleways and the things that we're trying to do with the roads. But I think the best step to actually ask that question is along an annual budget process. It isn't going back to Horizons, because Horizons, as the Mayor has already said, has their own kind of wheelhouse of things that they need to do. And Horizons is already putting $1.3 million of ratepayer dollars into this. And from my understanding, looking at this report, the revenue of tickets that they get, we're talking 313K. So in my mind, getting the voices from the community and finding out whether they actually want this or not, to the tune of around 300K, could be a really good partnership between us and Horizons. But we can't even make that step unless we ask our community what kind of direction we want to go in. So I won't be supporting that amendment, and I'll speak to the rest of it in due course. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll go back to Councillor Naylor for a right of reply.
Thank you. I acknowledge we absolutely do have a goal to reduce carbon emissions, and I think the direction that this resolution amended gives is a very proactive way of us delivering on that goal. You know, there's many actions that can be taken that would deliver on that goal that do sit outside of Council's core business. It doesn't mean that we need to add them to our core business. I think in the first instance, a conversation with the people whose core business this belongs to makes sense before we take that core business on as a city council. I think this is the right way to work in partnership with Horizons, to have a conversation with them first. Yes, we could we have to ask, we can't make decisions on their behalf, so asking is the best that we can do in the first instance. As Councillor Beattie said, this does not preclude any other actions that we could take if we hit a brick wall with that discussion. So I think this is the best first step to talk to the people who actually are responsible for funding public transport first. They have signed up to the zero fares, so they have indicated a willingness to progress this as a concept. I think we have also indicated a willingness to progress this as a concept, but in the first instance, we should be asking them to consider consulting on that, as that is actually their core business.
Thank you. We are now voting on the amendment. And that has carried 7 in favour, 4 against, 3 abstentions.
Madam Chair, could we ask for the vote to be redone, please? Because I'm not sure that that's correct.
Yes. All right, I'll invite you to vote again. All right, that has carried 7 in favour, 6 against, 1 abstention. Right, we are going back to the substantive motion, which reads that council consult with the community on zero fare urban... Oh, sorry, that's the old one. Just a moment. So the recommendation in front of us reads that council ask Horizons to consider consulting with the community on zero fare urban bus services. I will open comments back up. I do not have a record of who has spoken and who has not.
Point of order, Madam Chair, if the amendment passes, doesn't that become the substantive, and haven't we already voted on that?
No, we've voted on the amendment. So now we're voting on the main recommendation, but we haven't finished comments. Is there anyone wishing to comment? I've got no one in the queue. Councillor Dingwall. Councillor Dingwall, have you got a comment to make?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I guess I'll start by saying I'm disappointed that that amendment went through, but I guess it is better than nothing. I think consulting our community on zero fare urban bus services is really important for a whole range of reasons. I think accessibility is also one of the reasons that hasn't actually been mentioned yet. And having more people able to get on a bus with the rising cost of petrol and all of the rising cost of living is really important. When I see the bus in my neck of the woods in, Takaro, Highbury, it's been a lot fuller than it has been in previous years. And I think the issue that we've had with COVID is that it has messed up a lot of things in terms of a lot more people working from home and a lot more rules around fears around people, I guess, not wanting to be in too much close proximity to people, and the whole issue with lockdown. I mean, COVID has added a whole bunch of pressures to that as well. But I think if we can keep adding pressure to Horizons and to central government, it would be good to, I guess, advocate so that people don't end up missing out, because it's not just about reducing climate emissions. It's about making sure that everybody has access to getting from point A to point B, whether it's going to work or accessing the services that we have in town, like, MSD and all of that, or hospital services. Those are the big ones that we as a city should be making sure that our residents have access to. Yes, and I think the other point that I was going to make is that with Horizons, they do have a big focus on, I guess, the quality of service that that we're wanting to have with the more fares, and they did that whole big review last year, I think it was, which is kind of in train at the moment. But if we can, I guess, up our game on our side to meet the work that they're doing, that would be helpful as well. So I am going to support this begrudgingly. I wish we were doing it ourselves so that we'd be more in control of the process. And I hope that this isn't just like the end of the line for this, but I will support it because it's better than nothing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will support the amended motion, although I didn't support the amendment, and that's the reason for having two votes on it for those who are confused. But I will say this, I was reassured to hear from Councillor Beattie that if Horizons refuse our request to consult for free fares, that we can consider doing it ourselves. And so I'd like to give you all notice that should Horizons refuse to consult with the community, I will be bringing the motion back to the Chamber again.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone else wanting to make a comment? Councillor Barrett, would you like a right of reply?
Briefly, and only briefly, it's good that we have landed now where we have a general acknowledgement that this is a direction that the city would like to explore, and if the first stop in that exploration is asking Horizons to ask the question, I'm prepared to consider that. It certainly is a question worth putting to the community, and I'm glad that we're not going to fall over on arguing about who's going to put it to the community. I would ask that Horizons takes proper consideration around this in terms of the city's interest in seeing zero fares explored. We know that it's a lever that can actually help improve uptake of bus services and give transport choice to residents in the city here. And we're very much looking for ways that we can improve transport efficiency in the city. So I would ask Horizons to give it due consideration for the range of reasons that we have outlined. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right, I will now invite you to vote. So we're voting on recommendation 2 first, and then we'll come back to recommendation 1. And that has carried 100%. So we'll now vote to receive the report. And that has carried 100%. Moving on to item 9, we have got the Te Apiti Master Plan, page 183. I'll invite former Senior Planner, Jeff Baker, down, now Planning Services Manager.
Kia ora koutou, ko Jeff Aho. Thanks, Madam Chair. I put together a memo with my other hat on. It's around the Te Apiti Master Plan, and more than happy to take questions on it.
Thanks, Jeff. And just briefly, I do just want to acknowledge your work on this, in this space over the past several years. It's really great that you've been able to come back to, well, I mean, you haven't left the organisation, but left the team, come back to present this. Yeah, just to acknowledge a lot of effort from your part in this space. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Jeff, and likewise for a huge amount of work that you've done in the background on this. So just in terms of how this will play forward, would we have kind of line item visibility and budgets then around things that are specifically speaking to the master plan?
Yeah, I think potentially that'll flow. I mean, there's 11 key projects in there. There's quite a bit of work to do in this next phase, a sort of a more detailed look at the projects, and I think in some cases that that'll result in potential line items or potential grants this council might want to look at.
Thank you. Development of the Friends of group that's signalled in year 2. Is year 2 this year, or is that next year?
I think in reality it'll probably be next financial year. We thought it was potentially a really good opportunity to get the community more involved.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just wanting to understand timing on that, which you've clarified. Finally, any advice on how we can accelerate the designation of the former Gorge Road into a recognised adventure recreation type path? It just seems to be dragging.
I mean, I was recently at a meeting about a month or so ago where certainly the Waka Kotahi position on the level of sort of, I think they called it tolerable risk, was a reasonable shift from their more conservative risk approach that they've had in the past. From what I understand, they've wrapped a good team around it. They're working on it. Obviously, we have channels to continue to advocate them to speed up. And, you know, in my small part on various liaison groups, I do so. But the reality is it's still their turf and it's their process to run. So we're in the advocacy mode there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillors, are there any other questions? No. Thank you, Jeff. You got off pretty lightly today.
Yep. There are hard copies. I'm not sure if they've been distributed, but I can leave a few hard copies up on the desk if anyone wants to grab one.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we've got a recommendation in front of us that the committee receive the Te Apere Master Plan for information. I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Naylor. Thank you. And open up for any comment. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just want to acknowledge the work of the Te Apere Governance Group in general, but especially you, Jeff. You're a regular visitor to our meetings, and we've taken some time to get here, but actually it's a really, really important piece of work. It's a great plan. It really does map out the future of this gem. And to me, this could be the next great walk for New Zealand, right on our doorstep. We have a major metropolitan or urban area right next to a beautiful piece of biodiversity which still has remnants untouched. And the tourism, I suppose the recreational, the cultural and the educational opportunities are immense. I think it was Councillor Barrett touched on the Old Gorge Road. We've seen a major shift from where the Transport Agency was no go, don't go over it, plasters all over it. But just talking yesterday to two former councillors, former councillors Ross Linklater and Jim Jeffries, who admitted to me that they'd been through it and said, what a gem, what an absolute gem. And when you think about it, the risk level should naturally have come down because we haven't got 50-tonne trucks running through the middle of it, and all the vibration and the infrastructure there is still pretty good for walking and cycling. So I do hope it comes in my lifetime that we actually get to walk that legitimately or cycle it legitimately, and it does become what I hope will be a great walk or a great cycle for New Zealand. But thanks, Jeff. Really good work, and there's been so many collaborative partners. This is a real gem. Thank you.
Right, it doesn't look like we've got any further comments, so I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. So moving on to item 10, our committee work schedule, page 225, and I'll refer to the Chief Planning Officer for any additional comments.
No comment, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions on the work schedule? Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Just item 9, the Civic and Cultural Precinct update in March next year. Was that meant to be a 6-monthly update?
I can't recall a resolution around a 6-monthly update. We had an interim update, and then that was to be the final update. We have had.
December originally.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the timing of that report will be subject to the conversation that we have at the workshop on the 31st of August anyway, in terms of the next steps for the project. So there's a workshop scheduled for that date. We will be discussing the options and way forward for completing that project with elected members.
So will a decision be made about the way forward at a workshop?
No, the workshop will provide direction on the completion of the project. So the direction has already been provided to council. The direction from council is being provided to complete the project. So the funding was provided as part of the annual budget. However, there are options in terms of the way in which we do that. So just like any other workshop, we get direction on those strategic planning documents.
So just to follow on, the information that's provided at the workshop in August, is that an open workshop?
Yes.
And will that information not come to the information that comes to the workshop in August, will that not come to the committee till March?
No. So officers have been tasked with completing the master plan, and the budget was approved as part of the annual budget. Just like any other strategic document, as we're developing those, we have workshops and get input on council along the way. So that's the purpose of the workshop on the 31st of August. This item 9 is the indicative date for reporting back the final master plan.
Okay, so the original, previously I recall that was going to be reported in December of this year. If the report isn't coming till March, is there to be any sort of update to the committee before March? Because I think it was May that we had the last report, and that seems quite a long time.
Yeah, so we had a public workshop in May. Then we had the discussion through the annual budget process about whether we're going to complete the work. Then the earliest we could get a workshop time in terms of the discussion about, I guess, the way in which we'll complete the project was August. So at this stage we anticipate, I guess, following the conversation in August through to the completion of the work, at this stage we anticipate that would be complete in March. And the idea was always that we would have a piece of work completed to then inform the development of the next LTP, which will happen during the course of next calendar year.
Okay, Madam Chair, if I can move to a comment?
No, we're still asking questions at the moment. Councillor Hancock.
No, I was just going to comment, Madam Chair, that thank you to officers for tidying up the two.
Oh, Councillor, we're still in questions at the moment. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I can ask through you to the Chief Planning Officer just around items 2 through 6. Some of those are ones that have kind of bounced through the diary for some time, and just a number of them now signalled to land in September, and just if we could get an update on how likely that is to eventuate.
You're starting with item 2. Good progress has been made on item 2. As I said earlier, we're also looking at bringing a report next month around priority routes, not just for heavy vehicles, but for all modes of transport, which will complement, I think, the discussion on item 2. One of the officers working on item 2 is currently sick with COVID, so that has potentially dented the completion of that project, but that report, but good progress has been made, and I anticipate that will make September. The draft procurement policy, that sits with the CFO. I would need to check in with the CFO to check in on progress on that. I suspect that will not be coming to September, based on my understanding of that piece of work, but I can check that. Item 4, I had a conversation around item 4 yesterday. Again, there's good progress being made from the infrastructure unit on item 4, but at this stage I suspect it's unlikely to make September, based on the conversation I had yesterday. That is probably not detrimental in terms of the fact that we were only just moving to public notification of the Ekotiri plan change, but appreciate it's an important piece of work. Item 5 is on schedule, and item 6, my understanding is that will be, again, that sits with the CIO. My understanding is that will be provided.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Great. I'll move that the Planning and Strategy Committee receive its work schedule dated August 2022, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Thank you. And open up for comments. Councillor Hancock. Sorry, Councillor, we're just
Sorry?
switching over. Can I just get you to start again? We just caught you now.
Great. I'm pleased that we've got some money in the budget to sort these gremlins out of the system in due course. No, I just really wanted to say thanks to officers for tidying up both of the street racing matters, which are now accurately reflected in both pieces of work. That's item 5 and item 7, and I look forward to being present for both matters. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just in regards to the item about the civic and cultural precinct, item 9 on the work schedule, the next update being next March, I think I would like to propose that we request an update sooner than that. Even if that March report is the final report, I am really concerned about this idea of getting a direction of travel from elected members via a workshop. This is at a time where the Ombudsman is investigating this council as to the use of workshops and whether it is conducting the appropriate use of workshops. I think we've gotten into murky water in the past where workshops have been used to give a direction of travel, and I think it's more appropriate, more in line with the Local Government Act, if that direction of travel is sought via a committee decision. So I'd like to propose that an update does come to the council. It might be, I might need some guidance from officers about when the date that might be able to occur, but sometime later this year in 2022, if there's a seconder for that, I'd like to propose that.
Sorry, so you're moving a additional recommendation?
Yeah.
Can you put that in writing, please? We're just going to pause for a moment too. I'm balancing childcare for a sick child, so I need to go, and the Mayor is going to come and continue this. Unfortunately, I need to, head off, so we'll just quickly switch seats, and then if you can put that in writing, give it to the administrators, and then we'll hopefully get that sorted.
Has she got a seconder?
Yeah.
Just while that's happening, can I please take the opportunity to clarify my advice? The broad direction to complete the project was provided through the annual budget. So the annual budget decision provided funding to complete the project. The workshop is in public, and it's a conversation about how we go about completing that project. Just like we would any other strategic document that we prepare, whether it's a strategy, plan, policy, we use workshops to provide input to those processes. So that the broad direction to complete the project was provided as part of the annual budget decision.
I'm not allowed to chair until we have a resolution to change the chair, so I think that's coming.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we've got here election of the chair. The committee resolves that the Mayor chairs the rest of the meeting. Moved by Councillor Naylor, seconded by Councillor Barrett. Thank you. We'll put that to the vote, please. Ooh, that was a bit of a worry there. So 11 votes for with 1 abstention. Okay, we're back into motion and really want to get through this if we can. Okay, we have we've got an amendment coming up, but look, there's some in the queue that want to speak, so we'll go to you. So, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to make a comment on the work schedule in the light of other comments that have been made. And that is that I don't think any of us can interpret what has instigated the Ombudsman's investigation into our council along with 7 other councils. And so I do reject the implication that somehow the investigation is because of some kind of bad practice. It could well be that our decision to make workshops public has been seen as a positive thing and we're being looked at for that reason. So I would just like to provide a bit of balance to some of the other comments that have been made about the Ombudsman's investigation, because I think it's the Ombudsman himself has not stated why we are one of the 8, and so I wouldn't like the interpretation of some elected members to become the received truth. Thank you.
Yeah, just on that, I'm actually have a phone conversation with them on Friday just to get some sort of clarity on exactly the thing that you spoke about. Okay, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Echo Councillor Johnson's comments. I think the officer provided really clear guidance as to the appropriate use of a workshop in this particular work around Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. That gives me confidence that this work will progress as directed through the annual budget. Bearing in mind the timeline that we're coming into at the end of this year with the election period and no meetings after that, the implication on workflow for staff coming through that, I'm actually comfortable that March is a sensible time for this final report to come, and I cannot see anything to be gained by increasing the workload of officers to do an update report to come in November, which might then put the final report date of March in jeopardy itself. So I won't be supporting the additional recommendation. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to the mover, Councillor Naylor, of the amendment.
Thank you. Just to clarify, this recommendation is not to replace the final report in March. It's in addition to that, to provide an update. And the purpose for that is that information that is provided in a workshop is not transparent in terms of its availability to the public. Anything that is in an agenda can be viewed by our community. Information that's provided informally in a workshop is not available to our community. And for that reason, I think it's really important that even if it's an open workshop, that information is also included in an agenda, in a committee agenda, where it really should be. So this is just specifically an update. So include an update. This is not suggesting that the final report should be ready by November. It's simply saying that we should have an update, and my intention by November, my intention is that whatever is provided in August does actually make its way into a committee agenda. And I'd really urge you to support it for that purpose. And just to clarify my comments around the Ombudsman's investigation, I'm not suggesting that because the Ombudsman's investigating that therefore we're doing anything wrong. I'm just suggesting that we need to be mindful of the way that we use workshops and ensure that information that's provided in workshops does make its way into committee agendas in a timely way so that it is available to our community if they wish to view it.
Okay, look, I'll just make a quick comment. I will support the additional recommendation. I'm just going to distance myself from the Ombudsman comments because I think that's muddying the waters. But in saying that, this is $750,000 that we're spending on this piece of work. And to date, I've only had one very short meeting with these people, and it does need to be teased out more. Look, it could be as simple as the workshop material, but not limited to, being presented in the chamber, which I think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think this is going to create a huge amount more work for our officers, because most of it is coming from consultants. We don't have any commercial input into it yet. We don't have any costings to it yet. We don't actually have a lot of resident comment to it. So I think it's fair and reasonable that they front up and give us another update on where they're at. Remember, it is $750,000 for this plan, so I think that's fair and reasonable. Councillor Finlay.
Yeah, there's no secret about what's happening with it. Yesterday at the Older Persons Reference Group, there was a half-hour presentation made on the whole process and where it is. It's miles away from being finalised or even coming up with, final recommendations. So to look for something in November might be pushing things a little bit uphill, and you might be getting something you're just going to be same old, same old. I would rather wait till something is actually finalised where the people in the community can see what we're really talking about. But at the moment, it's a pie in the sky, miles away from getting anywhere.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I was just going to say that November, I think, is very, very bad timing. It's right at the beginning of the new triennium. I'm actually very happy with the timeline that has been suggested in the work schedule, and with the inclusion of the workshop, as has been stated. And to muddy the waters around the Ombudsman's inquiry, I think is it's inappropriate at this point in time, because that workshop will be public. So I won't be supporting the amendment for those reasons. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go back to write a reply, Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, just to quickly clarify, it's by November. My hope would be that could come as soon as possible after the information's provided in a workshop in August, but I just hadn't had that clarified. I'm not aware of what the work, I'm not, if that could be provided in September or October, then that would obviously be preferable. By November just means that's at the latest. Certainly I think that gives us a comfortable amount of scope to officers to fit it in where best suits the work programme of the Planning and Strategy Committee.
Excuse me, through you, Mr. Mayor, could I just clarify that all workshop material is publicly available and is placed on the website? I think there was a comment earlier that it wasn't. So any information presented at a public workshop is publicly available and on the website.
Okay, good. All right, we've clarified all that. Let's have a vote. Thank you. And that has failed. 4 votes for and 9 against. All right. We'll move now to the substantive, which was around accepting the Planning and Strategy Committee receive its work schedule for August 2022. We might just change, I'll move it, and seconded by Councillor Bowen, as the Deputy Mayor is not here any longer. Okay, there being no further comments to this. Councillor Hancock, are you still online, or has he just forgot to take your hand down? No, he's down. Okay, we will vote. And that is passed, 13 votes for and none against. Look, thank you. I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody. We will now come back at 1:15 sharp, okay, because that's when we need to start for arts, culture and heritage. Thank you. Yeah, you need to be here at 10 past. Thank you.